Thank you, Margaret, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really delighted to be able to speak along with my esteemed colleagues and to this broader audience at this august Congress. I want to disclose my conflicts of interest, seen there on the slide, and then go on to talk about ending HIV, and to say to you that ending HIV transmission has been an implied goal for a long time. On this slide, what it's showing you is the number of new infections, new diagnoses at least, in Australia from the early 1900s to 1980s to 2017. And you can see that we've plateaued in the last decade or so to about 1,000 infections a year. And imagining that should continue, 1,000 infections a year or diagnoses till 2013, I think it induces a kind of a lethargy. You think, oh, okay, well, I'm busy, I'm sure it'll go down somehow. So I'd invite you to look at your energy levels looking at that graph and that trajectory compared to looking at that trajectory there, ending HIV transmissions by 2030. And I think this concept of doing so is invigorating. It provides new incentives and it inspires desire for new and novel partnerships and to reinvigorate older partnerships. It invokes a desire for the best ideas and strategies. It increases forbearance. You can put up with more or put up with difficult people or difficult groups when you have something to do so honourable and important as this. It increases hope and optimism, and it's a rebuke to cynicism, like, it'll never happen. I think it's really important. And I would like to talk to you about how we might be able to do that in terms of treatment as prevention and PrEP. So what this slide is showing you, and I'm sorry I don't have a pointer, oh, maybe I do, no, I don't think I do. I'd like you to focus on the top two yellow bars because these are studies where people have been treated for HIV and then looked to see how much that would reduce the transmission risk. So there's two treatment studies on the left, and the efficacy, as you can see in those top two yellow bars, is up to 100% reduced transmissions between people who are HIV positive on treatment and their partners. And then in the two red bars below, you're looking at the efficacy of a person being on PrEP, and we'll talk about PrEP. That is a person taking antiretroviral therapies to prevent HIV infection. And you can see reduced transmissions in the range of 86 to 94%. So we do have some tremendous tools at our disposal to add to and bring around the end of HIV transmissions by 2030. And let me turn to the first one of those at the moment, treatment as prevention. How does treatment as prevention work? Well, to set the stage, you're here in Australia, so about 1 in 1,000 Australians are HIV positive. A person who's HIV negative, seen on the left, has an average CD4 cell count of around 900 cells per tiny drop of blood. These CD4 cells regulate our response to pathogens and infections through humoral and immune mechanisms, and it's this cell that HIV targets and infects, and as you can see in the third panel on the right, that middle cell is infected with HIV. As the virus leaves the cell to infect others, it kills that CD4 cell, it kills cells nearby, and then goes on to infect our other healthy CD4 cells. So that HIV positive person has a virus which will remain detectable, it's transmissible to others, and it certainly will bring about immune compromise and significant morbidity or mortality in the next sort of 3 to 10 years or so. So if you take antiretroviral therapy, and you can see that the person on the left is treated and becomes a fitter, healthier person, antiretroviral therapy has tremendous clinical benefit for the individual, and there are a number of studies which demonstrate this. And then in turn, if you look at the middle panels, that person will not go on to transmit HIV to other people if they choose to take antiretrovirals and do so in a way that means that they have long-term viral suppression. So you can reduce transmission to others, and there's even potentially an ecological benefit such that if enough people choose to take treatment and thereby reduce transmissions, that even at a community level, we've seen some reductions in HIV infection in studies from Africa and one study from San Francisco suggesting that treatment is really reducing new infections. And the science of earlier antiretroviral therapy is in. Up the top there, you'll see the START study and another study, Temprano, which ended the debate, which for many years had different guideline groups seen there on the left, trying to make the best sense of the evidence about whether they should start with low T cells down the bottom there, 200 T cells, or should individuals start when their T cells are a bit higher. And then the START study came along and started people on immediate therapy with above 500 T cells, and that study found that it's of tremendous benefit to do so. So the science of treatment, as soon as you're diagnosed, is in, and that's been a great thing for the field, so that indeed, in 2015, the WHO recommended that all HIV-positive people should be offered ART. So essentially, there should be no conceptual scientific barrier to putting lots of people on treatment, should they choose to do so. So let's now turn to PrEP, and as I mentioned, it's the use of antiretroviral agents by people who are at high, I guess medium to high, depending risk of HIV infection, to reduce their risk of acquiring HIV through different modalities. Typically, it's in the form of tablets, but current research is evaluating newer, less toxic tablets, but also long-acting intramuscular injections and also injectable versions of antibodies, which are showing very good results in primate models. And individuals may choose to use PrEP every day, or just intermittently, or around the time that they're sexually intimate. In randomized controlled trials, its efficacy ranges a little in the earlier studies up the top. The very first study to be published 7 years ago in men who have sex with men, the intention to treat efficacy was 44%, which isn't kind of earth-shattering. But when they looked back and found individuals who were taking their tablets as requested on a daily manner, in fact, the efficacy is around 99% reduction. And subsequently, more recent studies, the EPIGAY study and a more recent Partners PrEP study, show 86, 94% efficacy. And some of these studies are being undertaken in the community setting outside of the rigors of randomized controlled trials. And PrEP's efficacy essentially rests on adherence. So in this open label community-based study, of several, I think nearly 2,000 people, they were able to show that for individuals taking daily PrEP, or Truvada, which is a trade name, there was 0 per 100 year, the incidence of HIV was 0 per 100 person years, and began to rise, as you can see there, as individuals took fewer of their daily PrEP doses. PrEP's availability is shown on this slide here. And this is a deceptive slide. So up in the top left corner, you can see that different countries have guidelines and programs available. Underneath that, you can see countries where PrEP is licensed, and it looks like quite a long list. In Australia, you'll see there that we have several states, including Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland, with the different studies shown there. But there is a few things sitting in there. First of all, note the yawning gap where there's no obvious PrEP or PrEP demonstration projects all through Eastern Europe, Russia, etc. In the US, although PrEP is available, it's linked to being having healthcare and having access to PrEP. And in fact, of the 2 million people who are deemed to need PrEP in the US, only about 80,000 people are on it. Similarly, in Australia, of the 30 or so thousand people who are thought to be at high risk and would benefit from PrEP, only a third are on PrEP. So even though WHO has recommended recently that all people at risk should be offered PrEP, it's actually not going to be the case equitably for some time. So activism, access to treatment as prevention, as it were, or the benefits of it, and PrEP are critical for ending HIV by 2030. And I think how we're going to do this, one way in, and I think it's a very important way in to achieve this benefit, is through activism. There are significant challenges for bringing about the benefits of treatment as prevention and PrEP. About 36 million people are positive living with HIV in the moment in the world, 40% of whom do not know their HIV their status, so they need access to testing. And 62% of people living with HIV are not virally suppressed, so those people need access to treatment, and people need access to PrEP so that they are not exposed to HIV in whatever behaviour they choose to have. And this kind of graph is from UNAIDS. On the y-axis, it's the number of millions, and on the x-axis, it's time passing. And if you look at the final column, it shows that as of 2015, there are about 17 million people on antiretroviral therapy. And at the top of the slide, of course, 36 million people are HIV positive. So there are really some challenges. And let's look at the challenge of testing. We have tremendous stigma within different communities within Australia, and I know throughout the world. Having gender choice differences is challenging in cold communities. Up the top right-hand corner is a picture of a fantastic guy, activist in Australia, who came out to talk about the stigma of being HIV positive within the gay community. That's John Manwaring. And heterosexuals in the broader community, down on the right bottom panel, I encourage you to find this video online. It's interviewers who go around and talk to straight people, and this straight guy is asked, do people choose to be gay? He goes, yeah, people choose to be gay, yeah, that's right, that's what I think. And then the interviewer says, well, when did you choose to be straight? And the question completely confounds him because he realises he never chose to be straight, and he had to immediately just have this big mental shift about perhaps gay people are born that way, as it were. So stigma means people are less likely to test. So to increase testing, we need to address stigma and make testing easier. So countries have to have education curricula that provide robust education about HIV and sexual identity. And we need to have decreased stigma in our health workforces because many people find it that that's the portal where they most fear being stigmatised coming in for testing. And we need to lobby countries' registration agencies like the FDA, like Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration and the European Medicines Association to call for new HIV testing devices and fast-track their evaluation. We need to increase access to ARVs, and part of this is about working with pharma companies and their boards and shareholders to try and find a balance between the issues of social justice and corporate profits. We also need to lobby countries' governments and regulatory bodies to remove restrictions to ARV access. So an example of this is in Australia, where in 2013 I had the privilege of leading a successful major submission to our Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee. It was a community submission from peak HIV organisations listed there, and we used the great brains of Professor David Wilson to put all the modelling together and put in a major submission to remove restrictions that were in place that prevented all HIV positive people from having access to ARVs. So it's that sort of work that can begin to change some of the extant obstacles in different countries. We certainly need to have access to PrEP, and again, this comes back to working with pharmaceutical bodies and their shareholders and boards. And we need to lobby countries' governments and regulatory bodies to approve and subsidise PrEP. So as I mentioned, we have several PrEP studies here in Australia, but PrEP is not yet subsidised, so it's not free at all to people or subsidised in cost to people at high risk. We're very fortunate to have I think very active and scientifically aware state governments subsidising PrEP projects, but a lot of this has actually been in response to strong community and clinician scientific lobbying to get these projects up. And activism here in this city has led to world-leading online education at the Prep for Change website, and also activists in Victoria led the way in setting up a PrEP importation site so that people could import PrEP online from overseas at much reduced costs. So in summary, as a broad statement, I believe there are enough health and research dollars available globally to end HIV transmission, and in parenthesis, to end many other long-term health epidemics listed there. I think that broad health alignments of peak research, health and community groups, and I think we should begin to think of ourselves as health activists, can inform the officials that we elect about our community's health priorities, and that at least in this country we have the opportunity to vote in and out people and parties that will or will not reflect our health priorities. And by coming together and having these broad health alignments, we can then own our successes and failures when we do come to evaluate whether we met the 2030 targets. So see you in 2030. Thank you.